Oh, you've done it now.
The fuck?
You're hungry. There's no shame in that. But remember, there's a price to pay for eating flesh in these woods. You belong to the Mordio now. Here come the antlers. And now the flesh. Time for the blood hunt.
Cam Johnson, and I'm an investigator. Yeah, not professionally yet, but I have been researching a string of killings on the East Coast, and the more I find out about these killings, the more it seems they're linked by some similar bizarre circumstances. I'm going to lay out everything that I've found about these murders and my theories on who or what killed these people. On December 11th, 2016, 19-year-old Johnny Wells was found brutally murdered inside his dorm room with no evidence to explain what happened. Johnny had been recruited earlier that year to play football at Northeast University. The quarterback had an incredible start on the team and was well on his way to turning pro after graduation. Everything changed, however, on October 2nd when Johnny suffered a debilitating injury. A powerful tackle damaged one of his kidneys so badly, doctors told Johnny it was too dangerous for him to ever play football again. That didn't stop Johnny from trying, though. He refused to give back his uniform and wore it around campus. He continued to show up to practices trying to play, and when his coach banned him from practices, Johnny skipped class and wouldn't leave his dorm room for days, quickly landing himself on academic probation. His roommate Sean Branner said that he caught Johnny watching his highlight reels from past games on repeat.
Knights have lost 6 games since they lost me. You think that's coincidence? No, they need me. This is bullshit.
Before he withdrew from his friends, Johnny told them someone was taunting him. He said he received tons of mysterious notes in the back of his notebooks. After going home over the weekend, Sean returned to their dorm room to find a gruesome scene. Johnny's body was mutilated. His arms were completely twisted behind his back, and his torso was bent back at a 90-degree angle. The only other person besides Johnny that would have had access to their room was their RA, Mike Devils. Multiple witnesses confirmed Mike was hosting a poker night in the downstairs lounge at the time of death. But could any human have been capable of committing the murder? Johnny was 6'4" and 220 pounds. How could anyone overpower him and move his body in such a violent way without tools? Johnny's friends and family can't imagine who would want to kill him. I can't imagine what could have killed him. I have more eerily similar cases to share with you that leave me with more questions than answers. But until next time, keep your eyes out, your heads down, and your ears open. Later. Hey everyone, Cam here. Last week, we described the gruesome and unexplained murder of former football star Johnny Wells. The similarities to today's case will give you goosebumps. Let's take a look at the facts, and I'll let you be the judge if this murder was committed by a person or something else. Today I'm bringing you the grisly slaughter of 16-year-old Stephanie Lewis, who is found with her head and hands completely severed from her body in a cabin in upstate New York on the morning of February 21st, 2017. Stephanie Lewis was an above-average student at Grove High. She was on the honor roll and vice president of the homecoming committee. She maintained an active social life, both at school and online. Shortly before her death, Stephanie reached a personal milestone of 10,000 followers. Things changed, however, with the arrival of transfer student Elena Holland in October of 2016. Stephanie quickly became infatuated with Elena, and the two became friends. Stephanie's friend, Aiden Miller, told reporters, "We couldn't tell if Stephanie was threatened by Elena or in love with her."
Shout out to my girl Elena, you're number one.
Stephanie flooded Elena's pages with comments and likes, even on photos posted years ago. She would straight up insta-stalk that girl, Aiden told police. At first, Elena was flattered by the attention, until Stephanie showed up at all events Elena posted about. Stephanie's infatuation turned to obsession after Elena surpassed Stephanie's followers.
I don't want to be friends with her anymore, but you won't take a hint. Leave me alone.
Around this time, Stephanie claimed Elena started taunting her, DMing her late at night. Mysterious messages said if Stephanie cannot release, Elena was going to take a piece of her. So if Elena and Stephanie weren't friends, why was Stephanie found in Elena's family cabin dead a week later? Did Elena finally snap and lure Stephanie to her death? Stephanie's body was found sitting at her desk in front of her computer, her head and hands beside her. Police reported Elena's page was on her screen, and she was mid-comment on one of Elena's posts, who was 200 miles away at a friend's girls' night in. A mountain ranger did report seeing what he believed to be a hitchhiker that night nearby. He described him as 5'10", blonde, and balding. Police were unable to locate the suspect. How were Stephanie's head and hands ripped off her body? A powerful person with an axe could decapitate another human, but police confirmed that, just like Johnny's death, no tools were used in this murder. So what happened here? I'm still working that out. Next time I'll share a case that might make you believe in monsters. Until then, keep your eyes out, your heads down, and your ears open.
Daniel.
Cam here, and I'm back with another bizarre murder. This week we'll be taking a look at the death of 37-year-old Billy Davis. Billy was found split clean down the middle in a casino bathroom in Atlantic City on April 26, 2017. Now, was this a bathroom brawl taken too far, or did some kind of monster rip him in two? Billy was beloved by neighbors in his hometown of Palmyra, Pennsylvania. He was often seen washing his car or working in his yard. Billy's estranged wife, Annabelle, even said that in the beginning, he was the perfect family man. During an anniversary trip to Atlantic City the year before, Billy had hit a $20,000 jackpot on a slot machine. The couple was ecstatic over the win. They paid off their car, and Billy was hooked on the rush of the jackpot. In a few months, Billy had made over $10,000 gambling on sports.
Freaking won! Going to Cabo, gonna buy the wife something nice. Oh, I love this.
Annabelle initially expressed concern, but was also thrilled by the additional cash. But 3 times wasn't a charm for Billy, and on another trip to Atlantic City with friends, Billy lost it all during a game of roulette. He then became obsessed with winning more money.
Okay, guys, I know I'm down big, but I'm headed back to Atlantic City, and I just need to win one hand.
In a blog post, Annabelle wrote, he became 2 different people as he worked to keep his addiction a secret. He was fired from his accounting firm when he was caught soliciting online bets from his work computer. Billy began driving 3 hours from his house to Atlantic City. He'd disappear for days at a time with no communication.
I haven't seen Billy in a week. So, if you've seen him or heard from him, let me know.
The police located him 2 weeks later when a casino patron called 911.
911, what's your emergency?
He's in 2 halves! His body, he's split in 2! Oh my god, there's so much blood!
Officers found dozens of crumpled up notes in Billy's pockets with the same mysterious message. If you yourself cannot release, then it will come to take a piece. Police first suspected Annabelle of writing the notes, since she had been very vocal of disapproving of her husband's gambling, but her handwriting sample didn't match, and she was quickly ruled out. If you remember, our football fatality Johnny Wells complained of someone leaving him cryptic notes after an injury left him sidelined from football forever. And our Insta-stalker turned murder victim Stephanie Lewis thought her former friend was taunting her with DMs before she died. Could this be the same note that marked them all for death? And if so, what does it mean? Next week, another murder, and possibly another glimpse at the culprit. Until then, keep your eyes out, your heads down, and your ears open.
It was a final strive to produce a spark in hopes that that spark would ignite a dying flame. But after the accident 4 years ago, the tension in the atmosphere between myself and Karen was simply frozen. I mean, our relationship was beyond on thin ice. It had fully melted into a river of mindless blame and guilty regret. And she wanted a divorce. I mean, I didn't, but I guess I knew deep down that it was inevitable. In the winter of 2014, Karen and I had been together for 6 years. We'd been married for 3, and I have to say, our connection was on another level, beyond comprehension. Like we were on fire with electrically charged passion until our emotions met face to face with spontaneous combustion. February frost layered the midnight road as the full moon reflected glistening flickers of diamond surrounding the yellow cat eyes guiding our car home. We were coming back from Karen's brother's birthday party. We were only like 3 miles from the house. It was a Tuesday night. The road was completely void of any other signs of life. Empty, vacant, and inanimate until it suddenly lit up. I was driving. Karen was way too drunk to drive, and I shouldn't have been behind the wheel of that car either. And I knew that, but no one else at the party seemed sober enough to understand that. So I was admittedly way beyond my limit, and I take full responsibility for that. But I felt so pressured. My wife, her brother, even his wife, they all kept pushing me to drive. They kept saying things like, "It's not that far. You'll be the only one on the road. Don't be a wimp." You know, it was hard. We should have just walked, but we didn't. I got behind the wheel of that car, and within 1 mile from our house, I destroyed everything that Karen and I ever had. But the darker side of the story would stain our entire lives forever, till death do us part. Karen wanted to hear some music, but she was too drunk to work the car stereo. She was in full-on blacked-out party mode at this stage. I was trying to find a station for her when I noticed that she was taking off her clothes. She was looking at me, licking her lips. I remember looking into her beautiful blue eyes and thinking about how hot she looked, and bam! We hit a young woman walking home from her next-door neighbor's house. She died instantly. She was 7 months pregnant. It took the ambulance a full hour to get to our location. It took the cops 2. When the Blues finally arrived and finished taking our statements, they breathalyzed me. But of course I was no longer over the legal limit at that stage. So the accident was attributed to frost. A frost that chilled both Karen and I down to cracked shells of our former selves, worn out insoles of our souls. If that. We never forgave ourselves or each other for that matter, and we were never the same again. Why would we be? We were the worst kind of murderers, and we got away with it. We slept in our own beds that very night while the dead woman's husband identified the badly broken pregnant body of his wife. Come to think of it, we didn't do much sleeping, and I still don't. 4 hard, long years later, Karen served me with divorce papers. She had nothing left. I knew it. She told me that she was empty inside and that the only way we could possibly move on was to not be together. I didn't want her to go, pack her stuff and move out, but she was doing the right thing. So she started putting her stuff into boxes. Her brother Stephen caught wind of this and he wasn't happy. Apparently Karen told his wife Allison about the divorce papers, and Allison had tried to talk Karen out of it. But Karen told Allison her mind was set. Stephen came straight over to the house with Allison and they begged us not to give up hope. Stephen broke down and told us how responsible he felt for everything that had happened that night in 2014. I tried to tell him that he was only prolonging our pain by trying to convince us to stay together. Karen agreed. Then Allison started crying and mumbling that it was all her fault. I told everyone very firmly that it was my fault and mine alone. I could have chosen not to drive that night, but I did, and that's that. When I said that, everyone stopped talking. There was an awkward silence echoing off the walls in the room for several moments while everyone realized the inevitable truth. It was over. Then a single heartbeat spoke. It was Stephen. He made us promise to go on one more camping trip before we part ways for good. We used to go camping with them 5 or 6 times a year. You know, 2 couples, open air, beer, blazing fire, tents, all that kind of stuff. To be honest, it was something I hadn't realized that I was going to miss, or something that I was already missing. I glanced across the room at Karen. She was already looking at me. I could see an ever so slight raise in her high cheekbones. The thought of a final camping trip pleased her. It was a spark. 2 days later, we packed our bags and headed for the Freetown State Forest. Stephen drove. I hadn't driven a car since the accident. I sat up front in the passenger seat, and you know what? The drive over to Massachusetts was unexpectedly alive and energetic. I mean, it was like magic. Karen's mood was in a state I hadn't seen it in since I could last remember. Her and Allison buzzed in the back seat while I controlled the music. For the first time in 4 years, I could touch a car stereo without flashbacks from the accident. And there was this playfulness between Karen and I. Not quite a fire, but a definite hope. It felt good. Karen had decided to bring one of our old photo albums along for the trip. Neither of us had looked at pictures in a long, long time. Hell, we hadn't taken a single picture together in 4 years. The day before we left, Karen told me that if there was a chance for us, even a single shred of light, she figured we'd find it in that photo album or in those woods. We arrived at Freetown State Forest at about 3:30 p.m. On the way in, just past the forest sign, something ran across the road, inches away from the car, causing Stephen to swerve and come to a full stop in the middle of the road. Now, I admittedly didn't get a good look at whatever it was, but I thought I saw an animal, like a deer or something, but I don't know, it was too fast, and Karen and Allison didn't see anything. Stephen swore it wasn't a deer. He said it had antlers, but he swears it was wearing a cloak and had a skull for a head or something. I assured him that it was just a deer, and eventually he agreed and shrugged it off. I mean, it gave us all the shakes for a few minutes, but we all calmed down surprisingly quick considering, well, 2014. Anyway, we parked the car and walked for about a mile to set up camp somewhere far away from other campers. When we got to our site, the ladies made a fire pit while Stephen and I set up the tents. And again, the mood was as sunny and bright as the September weather that surrounded the woods. For a moment, I thought the trip might actually be working. 3 hours later, we had music from a wind-up radio, a campfire blazing, and the sun was setting beautifully under the tops of the trees surrounding our site. The 4 of us sat around the fire and conjured up memories that I had forgotten about. We laughed through the years of our past and fought off the tears of a future that we all silently feared would have a drastic effect on, well, all of us. As Stephen recalled a camping trip from years ago when we all encountered a bear that was fond of marshmallows, I looked over at Karen, only to find her gaze was already consuming my direction. She smiled under her brother's voice and continued to gaze at me through the dancing flame burning between us, igniting the spark that I was looking for. We still had a chance. After hours of reminiscing, several adult beverages, and a bit of admittedly tone-deaf singing, Stephen and Allison said goodnight to Karen and I before disappearing through the unzipped hatch in their tent. I winded up the radio to give it another charge and threw some more logs on the fire while Karen disappeared into our tent to get something. Moments later, Karen returned and silently sat down right next to me in front of the fire holding a massive black leather photo album. I knew this album very well. It had pictures in it from as far back as the first year Karen and I started dating, all the way up to our wedding and honeymoon. I could feel it. This was our redemption, or at least it was supposed to be. Karen smiled into my eyes, leaned toward me, lightly pressed her warm lips against mine, and kissed me for the first time in 4 heartbreaking years. It felt so good. But it was the last time that Karen would ever kiss me again. Karen placed the photo album in our laps and slowly opened it to the first page of photographs. So many memories came flooding back to me. Karen immediately began to tear up. We held each other for an hour and talked about every single photo in that album, one by one, until we got to the last photo. As Karen turned the final page in the album, there was one last full-page photograph of us on the left. We were in a car, driving somewhere, like a road trip or something. I don't remember, but what I do remember is that both of our faces were completely scratched off the photo. It took me a minute to realize it was us. To be honest, I recognized the car first. It was that car. Our murder weapon. Then our attention was drawn to the inside of the back cover of the album, the right side. Across from the haunting photo of Karen and I, there was something written in red. Fresh red liquid. I read it out loud. If you yourself cannot release, then it will come to take a piece. I asked Karen if she did this, if she destroyed the photo and wrote the message, but she swore that she didn't. I told her that it wasn't very funny and that I felt very hurt by this, but again, she promised me that she had nothing to do with what was in that album. She was about to say something else when a horrifying sound rang out through the midnight forest. We dropped the photo album as we sprang up to our feet like stray cats caught off guard. We could hear a ticking sound coming from somewhere around us, like a clock or something. Karen shrieked in terror and grabbed onto me tightly. She was trembling. I quickly shut off the radio sitting to my left so I could listen. The ticking had stopped, but it was that first noise that had me shook up. I'd never heard anything like it in real life. It was monstrous, instantly hair-raising. Karen and I stood frozen in front of the fire with our eyes dancing all around the thick darkness that engulfed the forest. After a few moments of silence and no further creepy sounds, I told Karen that it was more than likely just an animal and that we probably shouldn't worry, as most animals wouldn't come very close to an open fire. She was about to reply when we both saw it. A sight that will haunt me forever. Standing on the other side of the fire, sneering at us through the flames, was a terror that we could never have imagined. The first thing I noticed was teeth. The bottom half of the creature's disfigured face was mostly made up of sharp, pointed teeth that lined the inside of its black, rotten, corroded gums or lips. I'm not sure which. And its face was void of any facial expressions other than ghastly scars that covered its entire head. It had no eyes, no nose, no ears, no hair, just old, dirty skin with raw, open wounds that appeared to be in bad need of stitches. And that creepy thing was wearing a gray suit with a white button-up shirt. It just stood there silently smiling at us. We didn't know what to say or do, or we were shocked. We didn't even scream. I remember that the thing was wearing red cloth fingerless gloves. At the end of each finger was a long, black claw. I started to ask it what it wanted, but the second I opened my mouth, it started rounding the fire and walking toward Karen and I. We bolted towards Stephen and Allison's tent in full-on sprint. As we got closer, Karen began screaming Stephen's name and begging him to wake up. Neither him nor Allison answered. We got to the tent and Karen fumbled with the zipper, still crying out for her brother to wake up. I looked behind us. The creature was gone, and the forest was silent. And then I heard the tent unzip and Karen scream in sheer anguish. I will never forget how long that scream echoed in the blackness of that dark forest. I snapped my head back toward Stephen and Allison's tent and saw what my wife saw. Stephen and Allison, or what was left of them. My brother-in-law and his wife were both missing one of their legs from the hip down. It also appeared that the leg bones that made up the limbs that they were missing had been used to impel their torsos. One of Allison's severed feet was crammed so far down Stephen's throat that his jaw had become unhinged. Allison suffered the same fate with one of Stephen's feet. They both appeared to have been folded in half backwards at the waist, and they were disemboweled. There was blood everywhere. Karen was screaming and delirious. Then suddenly that hideous sound rang out through the woods again. This time it was much closer than before. Karen and I were still facing Stephen and Allison's tent, too horrified to turn around. I looked at Karen. I was about to tell her to run when two red-gloved, fingerless, black-clawed hands grabbed both sides of her face and dragged her away into the darkness of the woods so fast that it was as if she was never there. I spun around and shouted her name, but was met with nothing other than echoes of my own voice. I stumbled toward the dying campfire and called out for my wife again. No response. I was about 6 feet away from the fire pit when the beheaded body of Karen fell from somewhere up above me and landed in the fire. I instinctively turned around to make a run for it and ran directly into the creature. It had been standing behind me, quietly smiling. I fell on my back on the ground at the feet of the suited monster. As I shuffled away on the ground, I accidentally kicked our photo album halfway into the fire. When I did this, the creature before me hissed as though it was in pain. It fell to its knees and then began crawling toward me on all fours, snapping at my feet as it got closer. I kicked the photo album further into the campfire, enraging the creature into a frenzy of fury. It jumped up on its bent knees with its fist on the ground and prepared to pounce like a cat. It all happened so quick, but I recall it in haunting slow motion. I remember the creature's body leaving the ground and launching toward me with an open mouth intent on doing damage to my flesh. I remember thinking, this is my final moment. Then out of nowhere, accompanied by that dreadful sound we'd heard earlier, something clashed with the suited creature mid-air and took it to the ground. The two things landed hard on the forest floor with a heavy thud as they tumbled over each other. I climbed up to my feet and ran as fast as I could through the forest and away from the campsite. I stumbled through the dark forest for what seemed like hours. I had no shoes, no water, and adrenaline had consumed most of my energy. There were thorns and other things all over my body, but I could only feel one thing: exhausted. I finally found a blacktop road and collapsed the second I got on top of it. And then everything went black. I woke up in a hospital, handcuffed to my bed. The police came into my room and questioned me, and I told them everything, the entire uncut truth, and they didn't believe me. I could tell straight away. They asked me to describe the other thing that saved me, but all I could remember was that it had antlers like a deer, and it made a terrible sound. I was arrested that night, and later on I was convicted of the first-degree murder of my wife, Stephen, and Allison. I was sentenced to death by a jury of my peers, and now I'm just waiting. But something tells me that I may not make it that far. that my time is up.
Hey guys, Cam here, and today I bring you the case of 59-year-old Gail Paxton, who was found in her daughter's bedroom on May 7th, 2017, with her eyes, ears, and mouth completely removed. Gail was a stay-at-home mom for 18 years, loving nothing more than to spoil her daughter Sarah in their suburban neighborhood of Bethesda, Maryland. Gail had a thriving online bakery shop, so she could work from home and always be available for Sarah. She loved doing her laundry, tutoring her, and driving her to clarinet lessons. But Gail had a protective streak. According to her husband Richard, Gail wouldn't allow Sarah to get her driver's license because she couldn't take the risk of her being on the road with other drivers. She wouldn't let Sarah play any sports for fear of her getting injured and limited her social time on weekends with friends. When Sarah decided to go to college in California, many assumed it was because Sarah needed some space from Gail.
Guess who's going to California? This girl, right here.
She quickly became obsessed with monitoring Sarah's every move. Gail's phone records show her calling Sarah an average of 20 times a day. Richard says Gail had spreadsheets filled with personal information of Sarah's friends from stalking them online. Things got worse when Gail began the same routines as if Sarah were home. For months, she drove to music lessons and set their dinner table for 3. The final straw came in late April when Sarah announced she was accepting a summer internship in California and begged her mom to leave her alone. Gail had a mental breakdown. So did Gail gouge her own eyes out because she couldn't take seeing her daughter living a full life without her? Police initially thought this death was a case of self-harm until an elderly neighbor reported seeing a balding man around 5'11" entering Gail's house around the time of death. In another bizarre link to previous cases, Gail was found phone in hand with a dozen notes all around her that read, "If you yourself cannot release, then it will come to take a piece." This was the same note that was found on gambling dad Billy Davis. This could be the same note that former football star Johnny Wells and social media obsessed Stephanie Lewis mentioned receiving before their deaths. I think this note was a warning to each of our victims. To release something means to let it go. All of them had something they needed to let go. Both Johnny and Stephanie became obsessed with a life they couldn't have, and Billy ruined everything because he couldn't give up gambling. Once again, I ask you, is this a serial killer, or is it some kind of monster that stalks its victims and delves deep into their personal lives? Maybe it offers them a chance at redemption before brutally murdering them if they are unable to let go. I know what I think. What about you? Until next time, keep your eyes out, your heads down, and your ears open. Hey everyone, Cam here, and today I bring you what I think is the final piece of the puzzle. The case of Peter Miller, age 45, whose body was found in the former offices of the Gaston Herald in Gastonia, North Carolina, August 12th, 2017. His body was found completely dismembered, with pieces strewn everywhere. According to Peter's obituary, he was the hardest working reporter in North Carolina. Peter was editor-in-chief of the Gaston Herald and was adored by his co-workers. Peter loved running the Gaston Herald, and all the perks that came with it. Best tables at restaurants, free theater tickets, backstage passes to concerts, you name it. In early April of 2017, however, the paper was forced to close its doors as the digital age of instant news caused subscriptions to plummet. After a decade of living and breathing news, Peter was lost.
So what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. There's some stories that need to be told, and I'm still going to be the guy to tell them.
While his co-workers quickly found employment elsewhere, Peter couldn't let go. He started his own do-it-yourself version of the Herald and distributed his homemade paper every Sunday morning.
The Herald! Come on, hey, you there, take this. Make sure you read that. Only place you're going to get it. Don't listen to other things. It's not the truth.
He listed employment opportunities on job boards as if the defunct paper was still up and running. Peter stopped shaving, stopped bathing, and would disappear into the vacated newspaper offices for days at a time. Many thought he was actually living there, having lost his home because he refused to seek a new job. Police intervened, and Peter was ticketed multiple times for trespassing on private property before being arrested on July 29th. When police discovered Peter's body in the offices on August 15th, they found a message typed out over and over on Peter's laptop. If you yourself cannot release, then it will come to take a piece. Security footage outside the building at the time of the murder showed a man around 5'10", light-haired and balding. Police were finally able to match this footage to a suspect. When they located the murderer, however, he had already committed suicide. Now I know what you're thinking. Okay, case closed. It's just a serial killer. But could a man have bent Johnny Wells backwards at a 90-degree angle? Could a man have chopped off Stephanie Lewis's head with their bare hands? How could someone locate these victims and haunt them so intensely until they released what they needed to let go? I know the evidence points to a man, but there's something supernatural here. It's like something is pushing people to release their obsessions and return to the real world. It's like something can look inside a person and see what's holding them back, what's keeping them from living a full life. Is there something you need to release before the look-see comes and takes a piece? Until next time, keep your eyes out, your heads down, and your ears open.